in the ditch or something, stop to help.
Oh, wow.
Well, great. Thanks everyone for attending the Module 5 live session for the Ethics Around the Globe course. Our topic this week is pluralism and global economic justice. We're going to start out by talking about pluralism. There is a discussion forum going on right now which asks you to indicate whether you feel it would be better to live in a pluralistic society or one based on relativism would better help you live in a diverse community. As I looked at people's comments, I noticed Jenny and Barbara had an excellent understanding of the difference between pluralism and relativism, but a lot of other people did not. So we're going to get some basic definitions down. One, when determining how to live a good life, there are many perspectives you can take. When living in a diverse society, you have different ways of looking at other points of view. Pluralism is one approach to living in a diverse community because it presents a middle ground between relativism on one hand, which says that there are no morally correct positions, that no position is more right or wrong than any other. It's just dependent on the culture, the person, it's all relative. And then absolutism, which says that there's only one morally correct position. So in between there, we have pluralism, which says there could be at least two equally valid moral positions, and we could, agree to disagree as to those two positions. So that's why it opens the door for diversity, because it allows people who have different belief systems to coexist. Two people could be friends, one person could be Catholic, the other person could be Jewish. They just recognize, hey, we have different, religious beliefs, we can still coexist in the same society. Likewise, people could have different opinions on the war in the Ukraine, right? Somebody could say that Russia is justified in trying to, get the Ukraine back. Other people could say the Ukraine is entitled to their freedom, and those could be arguably two equally valid moral positions that people could just respect somebody else's point of view, and then again we can still be friends and coexist. A better example, I think, would be whether or not a terminally ill cancer patient should continue to get chemotherapy, or if they should just, reach the point where they say no more chemotherapy. One person could believe that they should continue to get chemotherapy. Another person could believe no chemotherapy. And those could be equally valid moral positions. Do you agree with that, Jenny?
I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think two people could look at the same moral dilemma and come up with a different solution. Another one that
I
happens in the
think
healthcare. Uh-huh.
I think we do that a billion times a day. Very seldom do two people think exactly the same.
Yes. Um, there used to be an assignment in this course. We don't have it anymore, but it used to address a healthcare issue involving a patient with kidney failure. And what happens with someone who has kidney failure is they use an artificial kidney known as a dialysis machine. And the dialysis machine, cleans the urine toxins and whatever out of their blood. And, that way they can continue to exist for a certain period of time while they're maybe waiting for a kidney transplant or, simply spend the rest of their life on the dialysis machine. And that's a moral question as to whether or not somebody should get dialysis or not. Any thoughts on that, Barbara? If you or a family member had kidney failure, should that person get dialysis? You go to a healthcare facility, you get hooked up to a machine for these 3 or 4 hour sessions, and you get the toxins removed from your blood, which is what the kidney does. The kidney is a filtering device. You can live with one kidney, but human beings are mostly born with two functioning kidneys. You can live with one, but you can't live with none. You need something to filter the toxins. So if you had a family member who had kidney failure at the age of 30, would you recommend that they go on dialysis or not?
Yes, I would. I mean, and then two, we would talk about it because what kind of life they want, what quality of life do they want? Because, but you said at 30, so I don't know. Maybe it is something a little bit different that would help. I know I've had family members that have went on, and it did prolong their life a little bit, but at the same time, they didn't have a great quality of life. So, and of course, you never could ask that person now, what would you do that or not? In some cases, I think some of them wouldn't. I did have one friend say that he wouldn't do it if he had to do it again when he was in his last stages. He said he wouldn't do it. So I guess you would really have to talk to that person and see.
Yes, it is I've had family members who had to undergo dialysis, and I used to drive a family member to the dialysis clinic. It was hard.
Yeah.
They act like, oh, you just go get dialysis, like
Mhm,
it's easy.
mhm,
It is like, uh, it's very difficult. And for some people, it's harder. It's a very difficult procedure. Some of my relatives have described it as like torture. It is not easy to go through that procedure. You're literally having, blood taken out of your body, cleansed, and then it's put back in your body, and you sit there, and that procedure takes 3 to 4 hours, and you need to have it done 3 or 4 times a week.
mhm,
So
My
that's a
thought,
more.
my
Mhm.
thought on it is the dialysis a temporary situation where you're just waiting for a kidney transplant? If that's the case and it's only going to be, 3, 6 months, maybe a year, I think it would be worth going through all of that. But if there's, you know, the kidney failures to a certain point where they won't do surgery, I think like Barbara said, you just kind of have to get the quality of life at that point. But 30 years
Yeah.
old, I think I would do it if there's hope on the other side. But if it's long term, I'm looking at doing this the rest of my life. At some point, I would have to look at it and say, when is it not worth it anymore?
Yeah, I mean, because people can live on dialysis, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. If you have children or loved ones, it extends your life. It allows you to live, for another 10, 15 years. You just have 3 times a week, you have to go into the clinic, undergo that procedure. But you will, the other days you're off, you don't have to go into the clinic. You feel better, you get to spend the time with your loved ones. Some people can even work on those other days. So, you know, but that's one of those situations where, there could be more than one opinion on it. You know, there could be more than one equally valid moral opinion. And pluralism allows people to, have those various opinions and still coexist. Any thoughts about that, Cassandra? Okay, let's move on to our political philosopher and ethical thinker of the week, who is a very interesting person. When I was in college, there were a couple of my professors that just idolized this person. He was a really important political philosopher of the 20th century. We're in the 21st century now. So the last century, John Rawls was very important in American political thought. He wrote about the just and fair civil society. He was from Baltimore. He grew up in a very poor family in Baltimore, and that made him think about, the distribution of resources and why it was so unfair that his family didn't really have anything. So he wrote a book in 1971 called A Theory of Justice. Rawls' concept of justice is fairness. For him, it's designed to secure basic liberties and opportunities for all citizens, including those who have been subject to forms of iniquitous discrimination. So, a theory of justice. For him, it's designed to secure basic liberties for all citizens. That's fine, Cassandra. He came out with another book called Political Liberalism in 1993. I believe in 1993 he was also invited to the White House. I think Bill Clinton was the president. So, John Rawls was somebody worth knowing. So he was invited to the White House, I believe in 1993, to talk to Bill Clinton. So it's like not only is he writing about political philosophy, he gets to talk to people who make public policy, and share his views on things. So his book that came out in 1993 revamps his concept of justice in a way that makes it possible for diverse and contradictory ways of life to still flourish within the context of a stable civil society. Rawls wants to show how his theory of justice defends continued and long-term support for the basic institutions and principles of a constitutional democracy. So, he's looking at the Constitution, and saying that we can, we can still all coexist and enjoy the basic freedoms and liberties that have been secured, by our forefathers and our system of government. And along with that, we can all still live diverse lifestyles within a constitutional democracy. Any thoughts about that? I know over time, diversity has been a challenging idea for me, again, because I grew up in the backwoods of Virginia in a military family. So I was raised a certain way. And when I got older, I decided to move to San Diego to go to law school. And my roommate didn't tell me that we were moving into a gay neighborhood, so that was a real eye opener, coming from, kind of an area of Virginia that was more traditional, moving into San Diego. I felt like I had moved to another planet. There were a lot of gay marches, where people weren't hardly wearing any clothes. There were rainbow flags everywhere. And I mean, that was it. Coexisting, living in peace, in harmony, with diverse lifestyles, going on right outside right down the street. So we really do have a very diverse society. I live in Las Vegas right now. I've never seen a city more diverse than Las Vegas. It's very, very, very diverse. It's an international city practically. People from all parts of the world are living here. And for the most part, everyone lives harmoniously, gets along, because people just respect other people's viewpoints and their diverse lifestyles, and everybody just tries to get along. So, I mean, I think it is possible for contradictory ways of life to flourish within a stable civil society as long as there's tolerance. Because, again, I have to be honest, I don't agree with what everybody else does, but as long as they do it somewhere else where I can't see it or away from me, I'm totally okay with it. Any other thoughts about diversity in your community, or whether or not diverse viewpoints can live in a stable democracy? I think after 11, there was a lot of question about people who were living in this country who were Arab Americans, and Islam Americans, and, whether or not they were being sort of persecuted for being Arab, in an era where Americans were kind of mad after 9/11. Certain groups of fundamental terrorists, but not everybody who wears a turban is a terrorist, right? That's just a silly stereotype. And we have invited people from all walks of life to come live in America. Give me you're tired, you're poor, you're whatever. So we've got, I've lived in San Diego on the Mexican border, seen people running across the border. There's parts of California, Calexico, Mexifornia, lots of diversity, lots of diversity. So I think this society is becoming increasingly diverse. Heck, there are 8 states now out here, especially in the West, where it's majority people of color. Nevada, the majority of people live here, people of color. Texas, New Mexico, California, these states are majority people of color. So I think it really redefines diversity. And when organizations are talking about, well, we need to increase our diversity, I've been in a lot of conversations the last couple of years about diversity. And then the organizations presenting their numbers like, oh, our diversity target's 10%. I'm like, do you realize that there are now states where the majority of people are people of color, maybe you need to revise your diversity numbers if you're truly an organization committed to diversity and you say you want 10% people of color. What about these places where you've got the majority people of color, are diverse? So that's going to continue to be a challenge. Any thoughts about any of this? Diversity? I could go on forever.
I know I'm understanding it and seeing it a little bit more, the diversity, because I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s, and um you didn't see a whole lot of what we see now. It was more of a, I don't want to say like whatever the show was, Leave It to Beaver. Like it was more of a mom, dad, and the children.
Nuclear family. Nuclear
Yeah,
family.
but now and even with me with working with um the children at school, I'm having to where I might be one way or think one way how it was back in the 70s and 60s, how the family makeup was. But now I'm seeing that it's not like that. And I gotta get on the bandwagon because I work with the kids. So I'm having to like really think and look before I say or do, because now I'm almost like pushed into it because that's how the world is now. Because I have some kids and some of them have two dads and two moms, so and I gotta, make sure that I'm treating everyone the proper way and getting along. And we are. I mean, it's we are. We're getting along. I got to make sure. I what I say with the one with the two dads. He called one dad Papa and one dad Dad, and it's like,
Aw.
and I finally now I know them apart. I know who is Papa and I know who is Dad. So when
Aw.
they come to the door, I know, okay, Papa's here or Dad's here. That's how. But who would have had to do that 20, 30 years ago? I mean,
No one. No
no one
one.
would have had to do it like that. So yes, it's I'm living it. I'm living it. Look, I think we all are some kind of way. I know we probably all got stories or something that we could say we know we didn't have to do, but we're doing now, and even more of it, and we're coexisting.
You're exactly right. As educators, I have learned a lot. I've come a long way from what I believed growing up in Virginia, which was that it's better to push a Chevy than drive a Ford. That's what, my dad was always a Chevy man. My brother had a Chevy, and when it broke down, we used to push it. For a long time, I actually thought Fords were bad, but I changed. I actually have a Ford now, and I have pushed a Ford. And let me tell you, they're a lot heavier. It's a lot harder to push a Ford than a Chevy. So yeah, clearly I've had to abandon some of those stereotypes, primitive beliefs that I learned growing up, and diversity to an extent has been forced upon me. I accepted that because there are things that I was taught when I was growing up that were wrong. The law has changed now, and I need to, like you said, learn to work with everyone, to respect everyone, to change viewpoints that I may have again held when I was younger that won't work anymore. They're no longer functional because this is a diverse society where everyone has, equal rights under the law. And those are the changes that we have to make. And see, the difference between you and me, Barbara, is it acknowledging that needs to happen, where you have a segment of the society here who will not acknowledge that they need to change to embrace diversity and to respect diverse viewpoints and lifestyles. I acknowledge that I have had to change to learn how to embrace diversity. Any other thoughts, Jenny?
Well, I was just thinking, my dad is a late 50s baby, and he is one of those of mentality of this is who I am, this is how I'll always be. There's no changing or um, seeing things from a different point of view. However, I am seeing now that he's getting older, that he is more accepting of some things. But I was going to say, along with Barbara, I'm from the 80s, 90s, and there's things that I never would have thought I would have seen in 2020, or things that I'd have to change and accept just because I come from a very small town that does not have a lot of diversity, very, very little diversity. And I moved to a bigger city. I moved to Green Bay. And it's a huge change going from 8,000, maybe 10,000 to over 100,000 in one suburb of Green Bay, one section. So it is a huge change, and there's a lot of adaptation.
Exactly. And again, your comments, Jenny and Barbara, in the discussion forum reflect you have an excellent understanding of pluralism, relativism, and how they contribute to diversity. So thank you for sharing that. Let's get back to John Rawls. So one of the fundamental principles for John Rawls, because he grew up poor in Baltimore, was, the distribution of resources in society. So he tries to figure out, how does society decide to distribute these resources? One could argue that you could distribute them in a way to ensure the greatest benefit for the greatest number. That might be like socialized healthcare, right? Or it could even be public schools, public libraries, public roads. Many of the public services that we do have now, there are public hospitals as well, where this resources are distributed in a way to benefit the greatest number of people, right? Because anybody can go into a public library, show that you are a resident of that city, and start checking out books. I loved it actually when everything went digital, right? I used to be able to go to the library on my computer and check out videos. I'm like, why would I pay to rent something through Redbox or Netflix when I can rent a video at home on my computer for my local library, didn't do it digitally, right? That's a distribution of resources that's available to everybody in the public through public libraries. Utilitarianism would say that's the best way to do things, to distribute resources, access to books, access to education, right? K through 12, public education is free. By law, students are entitled to a free and appropriate public education. That is utilitarianism. Certain aspects of socialism that we have in our society can be justified by utilitarianism. If you try to distribute resources in some other way, it wouldn't be for the greatest good for the greatest number. Rawls does not agree with that. Rawls wants to do something different. He says what we've got to do is find the original position. So we need to find a common standard according to Rawls. It's a universal standpoint, which is presumed to be a point of view in which all rational persons would find it acceptable for deliberating about justice. So to find the original position, Jenny, Barbara, and Cassandra, you have to forget about demographics, gender, race, ethnicity. It's like you're still in your mother's womb. You don't know if you're going to be born into Detroit, Michigan, or Beverly Hills. You don't know if you're going to be, Paris Hilton, or if you're going to be somebody else. You're behind a veil of ignorance when it comes to a class system or what class you're in. How would you then determine how to distribute resources if you're behind a veil of ignorance in the original position, without class, without race, without gender? If we were, for example, Jenny, if we were behind a veil of ignorance and I was hiring two candidates to be treasurers in my company, would I pay the man more if I was behind a veil of ignorance? What do you think?
No.
I'm behind the veil of ignorance, right? I just know that I have two qualified candidates. I'm starting from the original position. I would pay them both the same.
Right.
So that's what Rawls is talking about, that the correct way to distribute resources is we've got to get to the original position, right? Put ourselves behind this veil of ignorance. If I was hiring nurses and I was behind a veil of ignorance, I would hire the most qualified nurse, right? Not the one whose cousin sister's niece was my ex-boyfriend's wife, not the one who is the cutest, not the man who's got the best body. if I'm behind a veil of ignorance, I would think I would hire the people that are the most qualified and I'd pay them the same, right? Because I wouldn't know. So that's what Rawls is saying, that to distribute resources, we've got to get behind this veil of ignorance and find this common position. Um, which would eliminate one of the biggest problems that's also being discussed right now, which is this wage disparity, where women are still making 79 cents for every man's dollar. And women of color are making 64 cents for every man's dollar. I had to attend a meeting this week with the California State Legislature because they have passed another wage law that's supposed to close the income gap. And everybody talked about what they thought. And, they quoted all the statistics and this and that, what needs to be done. But I just realized that what needs to be done is hiring managers need to be put behind a veil of ignorance, right? Where they're just hiring the people that are the most qualified, paying everyone the same, right? If they truly want to achieve equity and fairness. As long as people are looking at people's race, if I'm interviewing two candidates, I can see who's cute. I can see, who I like better. I can, and again, people are not acknowledging the stereotypes that we have. That's why men have always been paid more. There was a belief that the man had to support the family and had to support the kids. Well, yeah, that was true in the 50s. But how about now? The majority of kids grow up in single family homes. The dad is not there raising the kids or paying the bills. So women should make just as much as men, right? There's no justification for continuing this pay equity where women are making 79 cents for every man's dollar. So I think if we could put ourselves behind this veil of ignorance, get to the original position, you know, level the playing field, then maybe we could achieve some equity. Any thoughts about this veil of ignorance that Rawls is talking about? Is it possible to put yourself in the original position? Barbara, do you think that's even possible?
Yes, I do. I think so. Yes, I mean, if I was going to hire someone and I don't, they both come up before me, I don't know either one of them, I would look at, okay, who's best qualified, not looking at, well, if they're a man or a woman, whoever, I want the ones that's most qualified. And then I would go for it that way. So yes, I think we could.
Yes, and I
You
think
got to
that's
clear your mind, because because we a lot of people come up with, hey, that's my cousin. Oh, all right, I don't know your cousin like that, but whatever. Okay, but you gotta just go up before with a clear mind, not with all a lot of stuff.
Yes, I have to admit, Jenny says that she agrees with you. As a lawyer, I have to admit that I am disappointed about the wage income gap continuing in America because John F. Kennedy passed a law in 1963 called the Fair Wage Act. You would think, what has that been, 60 years? That, by now wages should be fair, but they're not, and again, you have a segment of society whose egos would be threatened if they had to acknowledge that wages are not fair, and they aren't. We just had the thing with the US women's soccer team, you know, not making nearly as much money as men. It seemed like they would get, if they won the tournament, they would get 80,000, whereas the men would get 500,000. So, and the women's team was like 10 times better than the men's too. So not only are they not being paid as much, the women are having to work harder and perform much more and produce more after 6 years of litigation. Last month, that case finally settled and the women's soccer team was awarded $24 million, which probably means $1 million per player. Not a lot, again, for a professional athlete. It's really not that much money. And then that's taxed. That's not a lot of money. So in the future, the men and women will be paid the same. Problem is, though, the women's team is still 5 or 6 times better than the men's. They win all the championships. The men are never winning anything. So again, women are having to outdo men, outperform men to get paid less, right? So I think Rawls was ahead of his time in coming up with this original position. I really do. And to tell you the truth, today is the first time I really realized how good this theory is.
talking about the veil of ignorance kind of made me chuckle for a second, because when I was in middle school, I had a teacher that always taught us that it is not what you know, it is who you know. And she would say that weekly in class. Just remember, children, it is not what you know, it is who you know. And seeing the veil of ignorance and, Rawls' thoughts on those, it's the polar opposite.
Yes.
It should be what you know gets you where you're going, and not who.
You're exactly right. Ideally, morally, ethically, fairly. And the truth of the matter is it's a little bit both, and it really depends on the job. I can assure you, if somebody's being hired as a software engineer and the work that they do is highly objective and mathematical, or again, if somebody's being hired to be a head nurse, their credentials are going to matter more than who they know. Now, again, if you're talking about a different type of position, then it may be depending on, working for a private company and you're being hired to be, the vice president of some closely held corporation. Well, yeah, they may hire somebody that they know. But in other jobs where everything is much more, the standard of performance is one that's subjective, you actually will have to know some substantive information and have the correct degrees. So the who you know things matters sometimes. Other times it's what you know. Certainly in the field of science, education, mathematics, physics, all of that stuff that's very objective and not subjective, it's really going to be what you know. So I think it's interesting all the different stereotypes and beliefs that people have about, how things should be distributed. A lot of people think it still should be who you know.
Well, like
And
I
they
said, I
and
come from a very small town where that most likely is true for jobs and other things. It's not what you know, it's going to be who you know.
exactly, exactly. So yeah, it all depends on the time and place, time and space. Good discussion. Alrighty. Let's get into Cassandra. I don't think it should be who you know, but working in the medical field, that's definitely prevalent. Yeah, I have friends who work in the medical field, and the way that they get an advantage is by hiring a headhunter, and then it's who the headhunter knows. Yeah, there are definitely some subjective human factors that go into the employment decisions. So again, we have a long way to go in this country before we can achieve anything that reflects equity. And again, part of that is a belief. Does anybody actually even want this equity? Some people do. Some people would benefit from things staying unequal. So you've got a lot of different issues. Let's talk a little bit about global economics. See if I can bring up this global economic justice. Bring up this slide presentation. And when we talk about global economic justice, we are going to talk numbers and statistics, because that will help you understand the current and the historic distribution of wealth around the globe. Okay, race and poverty. And race is a discussion in the next module, but I'll use it a little bit today as it pertains to the unequal distribution of resources. I mean, we can all probably look around the world and see, like, poverty being concentrated in certain parts of Africa. So statistically and globally, there's a connection between race and poverty. A United Nations rights expert has emphasized that poverty is closely associated with racism and contributes to the persistence of racist attitudes and practices, which might in turn create that cycle of poverty. Racial or ethnic minorities are disproportionately affected by poverty. The lack of education, adequate housing, and health care then transmits poverty from generation to generation. Discrimination against groups and persons based on their ethnicity, race, religion, or other characteristics or factors has been known to encourage exclusion and impoverish certain groups of the population who suffer from unequal access to basic needs and services. And, right now, I really think about the war in the Ukraine and the history of the Ukraine. I mean, there's been genocide over there, there's been persecution of Jews. That is a part of the world with a very bloody and really hard history. And Ukrainians have really had to fight very hard to win the freedom that they have enjoyed, I think, since 94, maybe, being a free country. Um, and certainly, and again, in Russia, that's a part of the world. Do any of you want to live in Russia?
No, thank
Mm-mm.
you.
No, the average annual income in Russia is $10,000. The annual average income in Sweden is like 80,000. I think I'd rather live in Sweden. So again, there's countries there who are really places where people are really suffering from poverty. I had a roommate in college. She was very nice. She grew up in Russia, and her father was one of the top physicists from Russia. They had no money. They had to grow their own potatoes to eat. And of course, she got out of Russia, got her education, and went on to become a professor and lives in England now. I don't think she would ever want to go back to Russia. It's just, I've had a couple of friends who visited there. I wouldn't want to go over there ever for any reason, um, because they have challenges over there in getting access to basic needs and services. And again, during a time of war, that makes it even worse. Let's get back to the unequal distribution of resources. The manifestations of poverty and racism in the areas of economic and social rights, such as education, adequate housing, healthcare, and other rights affected in the link between racism and poverty, include the right to work in just conditions, social security, food, and water. As of 2016, 1% of the world's population owned more wealth than the other 99%. So in other words, this list of billionaires, and you can look it up on the internet. It's like Michael Dell, Oprah, Bill Gates, Rihanna now, Tyler Perry, um, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. These 85 richest people on the planet are hoarding as much resources as the other half of the globe, which is 3.5 billion people. Do you think that's justice, Jenny? That 85 people are controlling as much wealth as 3.5 billion other people?
Well, I mean, on one hand, it's not fair, but on the other hand, they earn their money. I mean, that do I wish I had that kind of money? Yes. But, Tyler Perry does these movies and the books and the TV shows, and Oprah, I mean, what doesn't Oprah do? Um, and as far as Gates in the technology world, I mean, they earn their money. They're kind of entitled to it. Do I think it's an astronomical amount? I do. Um, it's no different than the rumors of Aaron Rodgers making 200 million for a 4-year contract of playing football. Do I think it's ridiculous? Yeah, but on the other hand, do they earn it? Yeah. It's
Good.
double-edged sword.
No, I really think that it depends on what moral theory you apply. If you apply capitalism is our economic system here, at least in America. You're allowed to concentrate, and if through your capitalist efforts and through your labor and through your entrepreneurship, you have been able to create, right? Most of the people on that list of 85 richest people did not inherit the wealth. They created it, right? They developed it through their own entrepreneurial skills and efforts. So in terms of capitalism, I don't see a problem with it. But what happens if you were to apply utilitarianism, right, Barbara? Utilitarianism says that the correct way to distribute resources is one that benefits the greater good. Would utilitarianism allow them to keep that money?
Well, they well, I'm gonna say what I would want them to do, but
Go
um,
ahead. It's a
well,
free country.
they could share, they could share. No, well, and I don't mean like just give share like that, but I don't understand how some people do make so much money and some people make nothing hardly. I mean, like it's sad that what even people working in with children, you it really don't make no money, but you doing something that takes a lot. It takes a lot of patience, a lot of it takes a lot out of a person, and but it's a good thing. But you got to be passionate for it because you're not gonna make no money. You're not gonna be in that 85. You won't be a part of the 85. And that I sometimes I think, wow, couldn't they just pay a couple dollars more or something, just to bring people up? But I don't that part I don't know. I don't think it's fair. I don't.
Sure. Well, yeah, utilitarianism strictly, if you were, again, how the morally correct answer is going to depend on the lens through which you view the activity. If you apply utilitarianism says the morally correct action maximizes the benefit of everyone involved. So that would mean taxing these rich people, say maybe at 40 or 50%. I don't really have a problem with that. I don't, to be honest, I don't have a strong feeling either way. But if I was going to apply utilitarianism would say tax these people a lot, redistribute that wealth so that it can benefit the greater good of society or the world. These other 3.5 billion people increase and maximize their happiness. Paying workers more would increase and maximize their happiness. So utilitarianism would say pay people more, right? And we've heard a lot of, discussions about minimum wages, and Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders, he's an independent from Vermont. He's been really talking about helping laborers. He's talked to Jeff Bezos. He's talked to the CEO of Walmart about paying people more. And Jeff Bezos is paying people more. He's giving more people benefits. He's giving people um, great benefits and economic opportunities. So he has responded to that demand, and he is paying people more. I think some companies still need to catch up as far as paying people more, because you realize nobody can live off $10 an hour, right? Especially now because we're entering a period of hyperinflation. So salaries are not being inflated the way prices are. So yeah, I mean, again, depending on what moral theory you apply, a redistribution of resources might be needed. And it's certainly it's not gonna hurt Jeff Bezos that much to pay people more. It will reduce his bottom line, right? He will not make as many profits personally if he has to pay his employees more. Although that's arguable because statistically, it shows that companies who treat their employees better get a higher return on investment, and their stock is worth more. They have less turnover. So, in fact, employee companies that treat people better do better financially. They have more committed customers, committed employees, less turnover, less time taken off, and a higher return on investment for shareholders. So there are a lot of different theories that could be applied, which may argue in favor of paying people more, or again redistributing resources. But I think one of the things that we've definitely heard about, and it's more of a Republican versus Democrat issue in America, is capital gains tax and taxing wealthy people more. For example, you know Amazon did not pay taxes for several years. I think 2019, maybe 2020, Amazon paid no taxes. I don't know anything about Jeff Bezos' personal, what his tax documents look like, what his 1040s, I don't know. But I do know that Amazon has not paid taxes for several years. Amazon did pay taxes in 2021. I do know that. So is that ethical? That wealthy companies like Amazon are not paying taxes. 60% of American corporations pay zero taxes. Is that ethical? Is that the right way to distribute resources?
I mean, is it them just not paying taxes because they choose to, or is it because they found so many loopholes that, you know, they were smart and used loopholes to not pay taxes?
Yes, they use loopholes, tax laws, and tax accountants to zero to end up with a zero tax liability.
See,
Using
then I don't think it's Amazon's fault. I think we have to look back at the government and the people who initially made these loopholes and say, okay, fix this problem. Because let me tell you, if I had a tax lawyer that could figure all this stuff out for me, I wouldn't be paying taxes either. And
sure.
I can't think of anybody who wouldn't think like that.
Mm-mm.
You know,
Rationally self-interested people, ethical egoists, right? That's ethical egoism, which is not necessarily being selfish, it's being rationally self-interested. You know, if I could figure out a way to pay less taxes, certainly I would, right? Um, so yeah, then the question just becomes is again, what moral theory are we applying? Because if it's ethical egoism, then the key is to pay the least amount of taxes possible, right? Who wants to pay more taxes?
exactly. You know, and that's what I'm thinking too. Like the 85 out of the 3.5 billion, you know, you ask those 3.5 billion people, if you made X amount of money, would you want to pay more taxes or wouldn't you? They're going to go, no. You know, they're not going to want to do it either. So,
No,
you know, it's all on which side of the spectrum you're on.
it truly is. It's the ethical lens that you apply, and that's why John Rawls came up with that original position where you don't know what your socioeconomic status is going to be. Then how would you write the tax laws if you don't know where you're going to end up falling on the grid? How would you write the tax law then? I think people
As
would go
fair
for
as possible.
yeah, yeah. I think it'd be a
Because
flat tax.
you don't want to jip yourself and you don't want to, well, you don't want to jip yourself on either end. So you would basically take that original position and you would make it as fair as possible on both ends of the spectrum.
I think that would be a flat tax. I know Forbes is one of the people who's are very Steve Forbes, I think very few people argue for a flat tax. Very few. But I'm thinking that if you were coming from the original position, you're behind a veil of ignorance. I don't know where I'm going to fall up on the socioeconomic level. I don't know if I'm going to make $1 million a year or if I'm going to make 10,000. I think I would say, well, tax everybody the same. That'd be a flat tax across the board, flat tax. I think that would be the original position. Tax everybody the same, equally, right? Whereas we have a graduated tax level now. If you make between this and this and you pay this amount, you make between that and that, you pay that, and it's all something that lawyers can tweak, and make it so that some people don't have to pay anything.
Well, right. I mean, you're having um, dependents that you never even met before on your taxes, you know, because it gives you a bigger refund.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, it is a moral dilemma, the correct way to distribute resources. So here's something, trends in economic and wealth inequality in the US. Okay, this is what people are talking about, this growing gap between rich and poor. In 1970, the middle class made 58,000 a year. Upper class made 126. Notice by 2000, um, middle class was making 81. Upper class is making almost 200,000. 2018, middle class has only gone up a little in 20 years to 86. But the upper class is again at that $207,000 mark. So it's showing again an increasing gap between rich and poor. The gaps in income between upper middle and lower income houses are rising, which is a disparity in the distribution of wealth. The share held by middle income households is falling. median income is dropping. So that's a concern. Why income inequality matters. The rise in income inequality in the US is tied to several factors: technological change, globalization, the decline of unions, the eroding value of getting minimum wage. Whatever the cause is, the uninterrupted increase in inequality since 1980 has caused concern among policymakers, researchers, educators, and politicians. Okay, let's get back to this idea of poverty and discrimination, and we'll quickly look at the globe. Groups that are discriminated against, such as Afro descendants, minorities, indigenous people, refugees, which there are a lot of refugees these days running from political oppression, running from war-torn countries, and also running from places that the change in environmental change and climate change has made the place where they formerly lived uninhabitable due to drought. So we've got a lot of refugees and migrant people, and they're affected by poverty. So here is this is macro, a view of the entire globe, looking at the places where poverty is most concentrated, which would be brown in Central Africa, the red areas, between 35 and 50% of the population living in abject poverty. And this area here, which is yellow, we see in northern part of South America, we got anywhere from 5 to say 25% of the population living in South America, living in poverty. Down here, we can see in Mexico an increase in poverty. And then the areas marked in white would be less than 5% of the population living in poverty. Yeah, that's Alaska, Canada, North America. So for the most part, there's not a lot of abject poverty in North America. In Northern Europe, there's not a whole lot of abject poverty. Again, South Africa and North Africa, there's wealth and commerce going on there. Johannesburg, major city. Down here, again, you see very little people living in abject poverty. But then you get back to India, China, and you've got people living anywhere from 5 to 25% poverty. So just showing the parts of the globe where the poverty seems to be more concentrated. In America, there is a statistical relationship between race and poverty. Looking at children, what I find sad about this is looking at this particular chart is how despite the way that we do business, how much it's changed, that the number of children living in poverty in these different demographic groups really hasn't changed much. You know, during the late 90s, there was a period of economic prosperity. Even in America, we actually had a budget surplus. Can you imagine? Now all we hear about is deficit spending, deficit spending. But in the 90s, we actually had a surplus in the American budget. So you can see during those years, children, people of color, there was a sharp decline in the number of children of color who were living in abject poverty. And after 2000, you know, you see that number increase again. So I find it interesting, you know, the disparities based on ethnicity and poverty among children could be a moral dilemma. Let's move on. Okay. Environmental racism. Has anyone ever heard of environmental racism? It was talked about when I was in college. That's why I bring it up. I feel like it's important to know. Every now and then I will see people debating this on the internet. Environmental racism is simply the placement, it's really classism. It's the placement of low income or minority communities in proximity of environmentally hazardous or degraded environments where there might be toxic waste, pollution, and urban decay. One area we saw it was in Flint, Michigan with the water quality. There are actually several places also in the South, down south, in certain minority communities where they don't have access to clean water. In 2022 in America, can you believe that there are people who do not have access to clean water? I do believe that's a moral dilemma, a moral tragedy, and one that seems like it could be remedied, right? I think we could actually fix that problem if somebody acknowledged it and wanted to fix it. So there is still some environmental classism going on. Low-income communities lack the organization and political power to resist the introduction of dangerous technologies, landfills, as well as the mobility of richer citizens to move away from falling areas that are falling into industrial and environmental decline. And you've probably even seen that in places where you live. Almost every city I've ever lived in, every state has been divided up in a grid. It's like the west side's rich, the southeast side is poor, the northwest is rich, and all of these communities are divided up, into different demographics and different classes, and the wealthier classes tend to live on the west side or this. So, and then you also see people who are wealthy moving out of neighborhoods that are falling into an industrial decline, or where diversity might be changing. People who are wealthier might leave that neighborhood. So there's definitely a truth to this concept of environmental racism or classism. It's also exhibited around the globe by first world corporations who choose to export dirty technologies, dangerous chemicals, or waste materials that are banned by domestic laws to developing countries that have lax environmental laws. For example, in the United States, Dow Chemical has several plants back east where they manufacture plastic. Plastic is a very important resource. It is so important. Medical devices are made out of plastic. What, Tupperware? Plastic is very important. However, the manufacture of plastic creates dioxin, which is a toxic chemical, and a bunch of other toxins. So what was done is those byproducts were put in drums and sealed. And now we have a lot of environmental laws that prevent companies from dumping all of these toxic wastes. So what they decided to do is, well, let's just open up a plant in Mexico where they don't have the environmental laws, and we'll just create and we'll make our plastic down there, and then we'll just dump everything off in an arroyo or something where nobody's looking. That would be a form of environmental racism, because now you've exported that dirty technology and you're polluting their environment. Let's talk a little bit about maquiladoras. That would be a foreign-owned factory in Mexico at which imported parts are assembled by lower-paying workers into products for exports. Here's an example of one, which is garment manufacturing. I've also seen a lot of garment manufacturing plants in Los Angeles, and some of them employ illegal persons in those plants. But a maquiladora would simply mean, we take the cotton from the U.S., we send it across the border into a maquiladora plant where low, cheap labor, people who are paid less, then make the garments, and then we re-import those into the United States. That's a maquiladora, and this is a garment manufacturing plant across the border. There are over 1 million Hispanics working in at least 3,000 maquiladoras in northern Mexico along the U.S.-Mexico border, producing parts and products for the United States. Mexican labor is inexpensive. The food's good. Taxes and custom fees are non-existent, which benefits the profits of corporations. Most of the maquiladora lie within a short drive of the U.S.-Mexico border. Mexico has tried to pass some laws to protect the workers, saying it's illegal to close a plant without at least providing severance pay. U.S. companies still break the law all the time, and they're not always doing it. They're not always giving notice before they close a plant or giving people severance pay. Do you think that's ethical? Firing people, not giving them severance pay?
No, especially if they did the work. That's not okay.
Corporate America does some bad, bad things. And I mean, I know lawyers who would endorse this type of conduct, and they wonder why I get angry. No, that is not ethical to fire people without paying severance. And is it going to be easy for anyone who works in Mexico to bring a lawsuit against their employer who has closed the plant maybe without notice and without severance? The burden would be on them to bring a lawsuit to try to get their severance pay.
I think it'd be next to impossible unless they find someone to do it pro bono.
Yeah, that burns me up that anybody thinks that that's okay. And there are lawyers that you know would try to cover for these companies that do that. That's totally, in my opinion, unethical. A good movie that I totally enjoyed because I love these three actors is called Eyewitness. I'm sure you can rent it on Netflix. It's got Jeff Daniels, he's amazing. James Spader, Academy Award winning actor, and Portia de Rossi, who I think she's still married to Ellen. All three of them are in this movie. They all just do some amazing acting, and it really shows you a Mexican maquiladora plant and the controversy and the ethical dilemmas surrounding this maquiladora and how they get tied up into some of the more dangerous aspects of this U.S. plant, which is down in Mexico doing business to get around environmental laws. So it's a good movie. I liked it. And these three actors are, A-list. Let's talk about the good news and then we'll wrap up, ladies. The good news. 721 million fewer people lived in extreme poverty over the 30-year period between 1981 and 2010. So less people are living in poverty. Looking at this chart between 1981 and 2013, you can see 40% of the globe was living in poverty in 1981, down to only 14%. I'm sure the newest census data would be even less. And then the concentration of poverty within the low-income countries, 63% of people in low-income countries were living in abject poverty, and now that's down to 40%. It's probably less than that in 2022, I'm hoping. And I'm gonna distribute this PowerPoint presentation so that you can look over the numbers and statistics and do with them what you will. Let's take a look at our module 5 course project paper. So we're back at the job fair. We were at the job fair in module 2 with the course project paper there. Now we're writing a diversity brochure. You want to provide the participants at the job fair with information related to coexisting in a diverse environment. You feel that a brochure that provides information on pluralism, relativism, and absolutism could be beneficial. And I know both of you totally understand this concept, so you're not going to have any problems creating this brochure. So you just need to include an introduction that provides an overview of ethical diversity, definition of pluralism, relativism, and absolutism with an example of each, and finally a list of resources so that participants can learn more about diversity and these other theories. Let me share with you a sample diversity brochure that a student did a few years ago that was pretty good. I think this document's easy to create. You can create it in Microsoft Word, and there's a button in Microsoft Word for columns. So you would just go across your toolbar, hit the button for columns, and pick 3 columns. So it's a two-sided document with 6 sides, 3 columns on each side. So that's how this student has laid theirs out. They've added some a few pictures. Some people use a lot of pictures. You can again click on the insert button in Microsoft Word, type in the word diversity, and it will search Google and pull up some photos on diversity. You can insert photos yourself from Google, Bing, that demonstrate diversity. And again, when you're talking about moral absolutism, do not mention political absolutism or the divine right of kings. We're only talking about ethics this term. So be sure to talk about universal moral rules in terms of moral absolutism and Kantian ethics. And then that list of resources for people who attend the diversity fair and are looking at your brochure so that they can get more information. Any questions about how to do this, this diversity brochure? I would recommend doing it in Microsoft Word and just making 3 columns, inserting pictures. Great. So your live session question for this week is, what is the original position? And that is according to John Rawls. What is the original position? Please submit your answer to that question by Sunday, March 13th. Next week is the last week of winter term 2, Friday. We will have a live session next week on Wednesday. I'll move it to Wednesday to give everybody a chance to watch the video. So we'll meet next week and have a really interesting discussion. Are you both available Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time?
Yeah, I shouldn't have a problem.
Great.
I'm available. I think I'm available.
It's going to be an amazingly good live session, I promise. It'll be our last live session. So to give everybody a chance to watch the video, it will be on Wednesday next week at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. It'll be our last live session. It'll be well worth your time, I promise. So I will see you next week on Wednesday. Have a great weekend, everybody. I hope you're productive. Any
Yes, thank you.
questions?
No questions, but thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Jenny. I'll see you in cyberspace.
Yes, yes. Bye, Jenny.
Bye. Bye, Barbara.
Bye-bye. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank
You
you.
guys too.
Thank you, Jenny.